Amara stood frozen in the airplane aisle, staring at the shattered remains of her grandmother's guitar scattered across the floor. The flight attendant who had just thrown it down stood above her, face twisted with contempt, arms crossed in defiance. Passengers sat in stunned silence, some already reaching for their phones. None of them knew that within the next 2 hours, this single moment would not only destroy the flight attendant's career but trigger a complete policy overhaul across the entire airline industry. Amara had no idea that among the witnesses sat someone who would transform this humiliation into a revolution. But first, she had to face the unbearable pain of watching her inheritance shatter into irreparable pieces. Before we dive into this incredible story, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. If you believe no one should ever face discrimination, smash that like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss stories about courage and justice. Now, let's find out how a single act of hatred backfired in the most spectacular way possible. 3 hours earlier, Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport buzzed with the usual chaos of a Thursday afternoon. Announcements echoed through the terminals, coffee shops overflowed with travelers, and the smell of fresh bagels mixed with jet fuel in the recycled air. Amara Washington navigated through the crowds toward Gate B-17, her worn guitar case bumping gently against her hip with each step. At 26 years old, she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had just finished a successful week performing at jazz clubs across Georgia. Her natural curls were pulled back into a loose bun, revealing warm brown eyes that seemed to hold melodies even when she wasn't singing. She wore a comfortable denim jacket over a simple black tank top, faded jeans, and her favorite brown boots with scuffed toes that had carried her across countless stages. The guitar case itself told stories through its collection of stickers from venues she had played. The Blue Note, Preservation Hall, Cotton Club Revival, each one a badge of honor in her growing career. Inside that battered case rested a 1963 Gibson L5, the most precious thing Amara owned. The instrument had belonged to her grandmother, Dorothy Mae Washington, a jazz legend who had graced stages with Duke Ellington, John Coltrane, and Thelonious Monk during the golden age of American jazz. Dorothy had survived the brutal Jim Crow era, performing in venues where she had to enter through back doors, use separate bathrooms, and endure constant reminders that her extraordinary talent meant nothing to people who judged her only by her skin color. Through it all, she had clutched that Gibson like a lifeline, pouring her pain and triumph into every note. Amara could still hear her grandmother's voice from childhood afternoons on the front porch in Memphis, "Music is freedom, baby. Nobody can take that from you. When they try to make you feel small, you play so loud and so beautiful that they got no choice but to listen." Dorothy had passed away 2 years ago, but she had left Amara the guitar with a simple note: "Keep our song alive." Amara checked her boarding pass as she approached the gate. Flight DL 2847 to Nashville, seat 12C in economy class. She texted her manager, Patricia, heading home. "Can't wait to get back in the studio. The new songs are ready." Patricia responded with a string of excited emojis and a reminder that they had a meeting with a record label executive next week. Everything felt possible. Amara's debut album had been getting attention, her social media following was growing steadily, and whispers about Grammy nominations were starting to circulate. She allowed herself a moment of gratitude as she joined the boarding line. A little girl, maybe 7 years old with braided hair and bright pink glasses, tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed at Amara. "Mama, that's the singing lady from YouTube." The child approached shyly. "Miss Washington, can I have your autograph?" Amara knelt down, signing the girl's notebook with a warm smile. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Kennedy." "Kennedy, you keep dreaming big, okay? Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do." The mother mouthed, "Thank you," as they moved toward their seats. Amara felt a surge of purpose. This was why she did it, why she poured everything into her music. She had no idea that in the next hour, someone would try to take it all away. The narrow airplane aisle smelled of recycled air and that peculiar mix of perfume, coffee, and industrial cleaner that defined every commercial flight. Amara shuffled forward with the line of passengers, guitar case held carefully in front of her. When she reached row 12, she discovered the overhead compartment directly above her seat was already packed full with roller bags, suit carriers, and oversized purses. She glanced around, looking for alternative space. The compartments on either side were equally stuffed. Her stomach tightened with familiar anxiety. She had flown with this guitar dozens of times, but it never got easier navigating the complicated dance of airline regulations and limited storage. Taking a breath, she approached the nearest flight attendant, a woman in her mid-40s with chemically blonde hair pulled into a severe bun, heavy makeup that couldn't quite hide the hardness around her mouth, and a name tag that read Brenda Hutchins. Brenda was checking names off a passenger manifest, her movements sharp and impatient. "Excuse me, ma'am," Amara said politely. "I'm sorry to bother you, but there's no room in the overhead bin for my guitar. Is there somewhere else I could store it?" Brenda looked up from her clipboard, her blue eyes traveling slowly from Amara's face down to the guitar case and back up again. Something flickered in her expression, something cold and assessing that made Amara's skin prickle. "You should have checked it," Brenda said flatly, her tone carrying not just annoyance but something sharper. Amara kept her voice steady and respectful. "I understand, but this is a very valuable instrument. It's also extremely fragile. I've always carried it on before without any problems." She tried a smile, hoping to soften the interaction. "Is there perhaps a closet or somewhere safe I could put it? I promise it won't be in anyone's way." Brenda's jaw tightened. "I don't care what it is. Rules are rules. You can't just bring whatever you want on board because you think it's special." The words landed with deliberate emphasis, and several passengers behind Amara shifted uncomfortably. A middle-aged white man in a business suit huffed loudly. "Can we move this along? Some of us have connections to make." Amara felt heat rise to her cheeks but maintained her composure. "I completely understand airline policy. I'm just asking if there's any accommodation possible. This guitar belonged to my grandmother. It's irreplaceable." Something ugly crossed Brenda's face at those words. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm sure it was," she said, her voice dripping with skepticism, as if she didn't believe a word. "But that doesn't change the fact that you're violating carry-on regulations." Another flight attendant, a younger Latina woman whose name tag identified her as Rosa Martinez, approached from the galley. She had been organizing drinks and overheard the exchange. "Brenda," Rosa said quietly, "maybe we could make space in the front closet? We've done that before for musical instruments." Brenda's head snapped toward Rosa with surprising venom. "I'm handling this, Rosa. I don't need your input." Rosa's eyes widened slightly at the harsh rebuke, but she stepped back, clearly accustomed to Brenda's domineering behavior. The tension in the aisle was becoming palpable. More passengers had noticed the holdup, some watching with curiosity, others with irritation. A few had already pulled out their phones, though whether to check messages or document the scene wasn't yet clear. Amara clutched the guitar case tighter, trying to ignore the feeling of dozens of eyes on her. This wasn't supposed to be difficult. She had done everything right, arrived early, been polite, followed procedures. Yet here she stood, being treated like she had committed some terrible offense simply by trying to protect something precious. Brenda crossed her arms, her body language radiating hostility. "Either check that instrument at the gate, or you need to get off this plane. You're holding everyone up, and I won't have my flight delayed because you refuse to follow instructions." The way she said, "you," carried weight beyond the simple pronoun. Amara heard it, felt it in her bones. This wasn't really about the guitar or airline policy. This was about something else entirely, something ugly and old and exhausting. She took a steadying breath, pushing down the anger and hurt that threatened to overwhelm her professionalism. "Ma'am, I'm willing to pay any extra fee. I'll hold it on my lap if necessary. I'm begging you, please don't make me check this. It won't survive baggage handling." Her voice cracked slightly on the last sentence, betraying the emotion she was trying to control. Brenda's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened further. Final warning. Check it or leave. In the back of the cabin, an older black woman with silver hair and glasses stood up from her seat in row 18. Her name was Geneva Patterson, a retired schoolteacher from Birmingham who had witnessed more discrimination in her 68 years than anyone should have to endure. She recognized exactly what was happening. "Excuse me," Geneva called out, her voice strong and clear despite her age. "But I watched you let that white gentleman in first class bring his golf clubs on board not 20 minutes ago. I saw you help him find space for them yourself." The cabin went completely silent. Every eye turned toward Brenda, whose face flushed deep red. "That's completely different," she snapped. "Those were properly sized according to regulations." Geneva wasn't backing down. They were bigger than her guitar case. "I got eyes that still work just fine." Other passengers began murmuring. The situation that had been uncomfortable was rapidly becoming something more, something that smelled like injustice. Amara wished the floor would open and swallow her whole. She hadn't wanted this confrontation, hadn't wanted to become the center of a scene. All she had wanted was to get home safely with her grandmother's guitar intact. Now she stood in the narrow aisle, caught between Brenda's escalating hostility and the growing awareness among passengers that something fundamentally wrong was unfolding. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously, refusing to cry in front of these strangers, refusing to give Brenda the satisfaction of seeing her break. "Please," Amara said one more time, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm begging you. This guitar is all I have left of my grandmother. She played it for President Kennedy. She performed with Duke Ellington. It's not just an instrument, it's a piece of history. I promise I'll keep it safe, I'll hold it the entire flight, it won't bother anyone." She hated how desperate she sounded, hated that she had to plead for basic human decency, but her grandmother's guitar was worth swallowing her pride. Brenda stared at her with something approaching satisfaction, as if Amara's desperation proved some point she had been trying to make. "Maybe if you flew first class, you'd know how to follow rules properly," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. The implication hung in the air like poison. She was saying that Amara didn't belong, couldn't afford better, wasn't the kind of passenger who deserved accommodation. The subtext was clear to everyone listening: people like you should know your place. A younger black man named Jerome, sitting in seat 15A, raised his phone and started recording. "This is unbelievable," he muttered, making sure his camera captured Brenda's face clearly. Several other passengers did the same, the modern instinct to document injustice taking over. Brenda noticed the phones and her expression tightened further, but she didn't back down. If anything, being recorded seemed to make her more determined to assert her authority. Rosa stepped forward again, despite Brenda's earlier rebuke. "Brenda, please. Let's just find a solution. This doesn't have to be a big deal." Her voice carried a pleading quality, the sound of someone who had watched this pattern before and knew where it led. Brenda whirled on her. "Rosa, I told you to stay out of this. If you can't support your fellow crew members, maybe you should reconsider your position with this airline." The threat was explicit. Rosa's face went pale, but she held her ground. "I do support my crew. But I also support doing the right thing. And this isn't right." Another flight attendant, a young white man named Travis who had been helping passengers toward the back of the plane, made his way forward to see what was causing the delay. He was 29, relatively new to the job, and had witnessed enough of Brenda's behavior over the past year to make him deeply uncomfortable. "What's going on?" he asked carefully. Brenda pointed at Amara. "This passenger refuses to follow carry-on regulations. She's delaying the flight." Travis looked at the guitar case, then at the overhead bins, then at Brenda's face. He saw something there that made his stomach turn. "Brenda, we have space in the front closet." I checked it 5 minutes ago. We can easily accommodate her instrument. Brenda's face contorted with barely contained rage. That space is reserved for crew items and emergency equipment. Not for passengers who can't plan ahead properly. Geneva called out again from her seat. I've been flying for 40 years, young lady. I know discrimination when I see it. And everyone on this plane knows exactly what you're doing. Several passengers murmured in agreement. A middle-aged white woman named Hazel, sitting in business class, stood up. This is absolutely disgraceful. That young woman has been nothing but polite. You've been rude and dismissive from the start. A white man in his 30s added his voice. Just let her keep the guitar so we can take off. This is ridiculous. But another passenger, an older white man in a suit, shook his head. Rules exist for a reason. If we make exceptions for everyone, it's chaos. The cabin had divided into camps, some defending Amara, others reflexively supporting the authority figure regardless of the obvious injustice. Amara felt lightheaded, overwhelmed by the attention, by the conflict swirling around her. She carefully set the guitar case down on an empty seat, her hands trembling. I'll pay whatever fee you want, she said, her voice shaking. I'll upgrade my ticket if that's what it takes. I'll do anything. Please don't make me check this guitar. Please. Brenda looked down at Amara with unconcealed contempt. It's not about money. It's about following rules. It's about people learning that they can't just do whatever they want because they think they're special. The words landed like slaps. Geneva stood up fully now, moving into the aisle despite the fact that the plane hadn't finished boarding. Child, don't you dare beg this woman for anything. She doesn't deserve your tears or your pleas. What she's doing is wrong, and everybody here knows it. The temperature in the cabin seemed to rise. Tension crackled like electricity. More phones appeared, recording every moment. On social media, the first uploads were already beginning, tiny sparks that would soon become a wildfire. Brenda's face had gone from red to an almost purple shade, fury and something else, maybe fear, competing for dominance in her expression. She had backed herself into a corner, and the only direction she knew how to go was forward, deeper into cruelty, farther from any possibility of redemption. What happened next took only seconds, but Amara would replay it in slow motion for months afterward, each detail etched into her memory with excruciating clarity. Brenda stepped forward and grabbed the guitar case from where Amara had set it on the seat. Her grip was rough, fingers digging into the worn leather handle. If you won't check it properly, then I'll take care of it myself, she said, her voice tight with barely restrained anger. Amara's heart stopped. Wait, please, let me hold it. I'll be careful. Please. She reached out, trying to take the case back gently. But Brenda jerked it away from her, holding it up and away as if Amara were a child reaching for something forbidden. The movement was aggressive, performative, designed to humiliate. You should have thought about this before you boarded, Brenda hissed. Then, with a deliberate loosening of her grip, she let the guitar case slip from her hands. Time seemed to fracture. The case tumbled through the air, spinning slightly. Amara lunged forward, hands outstretched, a scream building in her throat. But she was too far away, too slow. The guitar case hit the floor of the airplane aisle with a sickening crash that echoed through the entire cabin. The sound of wood splintering was unmistakable, a cracking, breaking noise that made everyone who heard it wince. The latches on the case popped open from the impact, and the guitar itself partially slid out, revealing the catastrophic damage. The neck had snapped clean in two places. The beautiful maple body had a long, deep crack running from the sound hole nearly to the bottom edge. Strings had broken and coiled like dying snakes. Pieces of the ornate inlay work had popped off and skittered across the floor. Amara's scream finally emerged, a sound of pure anguish that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs. No. No. Oh God, no. She dropped to her knees, hands hovering over the destroyed instrument, afraid to touch it, afraid that touching it would make the nightmare real. Tears streamed down her face unchecked. Her whole body shook. The airplane cabin fell into absolute silence. Even the crying baby 3 rows back had stopped. Every passenger stared in horrified disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Brenda stood above Amara, and on her face, for just a brief moment before she controlled her expression, was something that looked almost like satisfaction. She had won. She had asserted her authority. This passenger who had dared to inconvenience her, who had dared to question her, had been put firmly in her place. "Well," Brenda said, her voice cold and steady, "I guess that solves our storage problem. You should have been more careful with your belongings. Maybe next time you'll follow instructions. Before we continue, I need to ask you something. If you believe what Brenda did was absolutely unacceptable, type the number 1 in the comments right now. And if you think discrimination has no place in our skies or anywhere else, smash that like button and subscribe to this channel because stories like this need to be told. Now, here's what I want to know, do you think Brenda had any idea who was watching her at that exact moment? Do you think she realized that her cruel act was about to destroy her entire life? Stay with me, because what happens next is absolutely jaw-dropping. Amara carefully, reverently, picked up the largest piece of the guitar body. Her fingers traced the crack in the wood, the place where her grandmother's hands had rested thousands of times. A small sticker near the sound hole had somehow remained intact, Dorothy's Jazz House 1963, in faded letters. She pressed the piece of wood to her chest, bending over it protectively, and sobbed. The sound of her crying was raw and broken, the sound of grief too large to contain. Geneva had pushed her way up the aisle, ignoring the rules about staying seated. She knelt beside Amara, placing a gentle hand on her shaking shoulder. "Oh baby, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Rosa stood frozen, one hand covering her mouth, her eyes filled with tears. She looked at Brenda with an expression of pure horror. "Brenda, what did you do? What did you just do?" Travis had gone pale. He stared at the destroyed guitar, then at Brenda, then back at Amara. "You did that on purpose," he said quietly. "I saw you. You dropped it on purpose." Brenda's mask slipped back into place. It slipped. Accidents happen. She shouldn't have brought something so valuable on a plane if she couldn't accept the risk. Her words were careful, practiced, the reflexive self-protection of someone who knew she had crossed a line but refused to admit fault. Jerome, still recording, spoke directly into his phone camera. "Y'all seeing this? This flight attendant just destroyed this woman's guitar on purpose. This is on Delta Flight 2847, attendant named Brenda Hutchins. This is straight-up discrimination and destruction of property." Other passengers voiced their outrage. A woman shouted, "That was deliberate. I saw her let it fall." A man called out, "Someone needs to report this immediately." The little girl, Kennedy, who had asked Amara for an autograph earlier, was crying. "Mama, why did that mean lady break the singing lady's guitar?" In seat 3A of the business class section, a man had been watching the entire interaction with the focused attention of someone who understood exactly what he was witnessing. Maxwell Sterling was 62 years old, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit. He had been a passenger on thousands of flights over his 40-year career in business. He had seen good service and bad service, competent staff and incompetent staff. But he had never seen anything quite like this, such blatant, cruel, calculated discrimination wrapped in the excuse of policy enforcement. And he was in a unique position to do something about it. Because Maxwell Sterling wasn't just any passenger. He was a member of the board of directors for this very airline. He had founded 3 successful companies, sat on numerous corporate boards, and had spent the last decade working specifically on diversity and inclusion initiatives in the business world. He had been on his way home from a series of meetings about exactly this kind of systemic discrimination. And now, here it was, playing out right in front of him in the most stark and undeniable way possible. He took out his phone and made a note with 3 words, Brenda Hutchins. Terminated. The passengers erupted. What had been uncomfortable tension exploded into outright confrontation. Geneva stood up fully, pointing at Brenda with a shaking finger. This is a disgrace. That woman should be arrested for destruction of property. She did that deliberately, and every single person on this plane witnessed it. Jerome continued recording. This video is going straight to Twitter and TikTok. The whole world is gonna see what you did. Y'all better get ready because this is about to go viral. His followers numbered in the tens of thousands, people who trusted his eye for injustice and his willingness to call it out. He knew exactly what he had captured, clear, undeniable video evidence of deliberate discrimination and destruction. A younger white woman named Hazel from row 9 stood up. I can't believe what I just saw. This is horrifying. That guitar was obviously precious to her. How could you do something so heartless? She looked around at the other passengers. Everyone needs to report this. We all saw it. Another passenger, a black man in his 40s named Curtis, added his voice. I've flown 1,000,000 miles, and I've seen a lot of disrespect. But I've never seen anything this cruel. That attendant needs to be fired. Brenda tried to regain control, her voice rising. Everyone needs to calm down and return to your seats. We need to prepare for departure. But her authority had evaporated. No one was listening anymore. Several passengers had pulled out their phones not to record but to write formal complaints, filing them in real time through the airline's app. Rosa, the Latina flight attendant, made a decision that would define her own courage. She stepped forward, directly in front of Brenda, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. I'm calling the captain. What you did was inexcusable, Brenda. I've watched you mistreat passengers for months, but I was too scared to speak up. Not anymore. I'm reporting everything. Brenda's face went from red to white. Rosa, you're making a huge mistake. You have no idea what you're doing. Rosa pulled out the internal communication device. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago. Travis joined her. I'm filing a report too. I've documented at least 6 incidents in the past year where you've treated passengers of color differently than white passengers. I kept notes because I knew something like this would eventually happen. Brenda looked around wildly, suddenly realizing that she was completely isolated, that no one was coming to her defense. You're all overreacting. It was an accident. The case slipped. Geneva's voice cut through like a blade. Child, don't you dare stand there and lie. We all got eyes. You looked that girl right in the face when you dropped her grandmother's guitar. You wanted to hurt her, and you did. Amara remained on the floor, surrounded by pieces of destroyed wood and broken strings, still crying softly. She felt disconnected from her body, like she was watching this happen to someone else. The guitar that had survived 60 years, that had traveled from Harlem to New Orleans to Chicago and back, that had been played in the presence of presidents and legends, was gone. Her last physical connection to her grandmother, destroyed in seconds by pure malice. She couldn't process it. Her mind kept showing her images, her grandmother's hands on those strings, teaching her first chords when she was 7 years old. Her grandmother singing on the porch, that guitar cradled like a child. Her grandmother's face, full of love and pride, the last time Amara had visited before the cancer took her. Keep our song alive, baby girl. But how could she keep the song alive when the instrument itself was destroyed? Maxwell Sterling stood up. He was a tall man, commanding in presence without being loud about it. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. Excuse me, everyone. May I have your attention, please? The cabin gradually quieted, passengers turning to look at this distinguished older white man. "My name is Maxwell Sterling. I'm a member of the board of directors for this airline." A collective intake of breath. Brenda's face drained of all remaining color. Her knees actually wobbled slightly. Maxwell stepped into the aisle, making his way toward the front of the plane. His eyes stayed fixed on Brenda, who seemed to shrink with each step he took. "What's your name, ma'am?" he asked, though his tone made clear it wasn't really a question. "Brenda. Brenda Hutchins, sir," she stammered. Her earlier confidence had completely vanished. Maxwell nodded slowly. "Miss Hutchins, I've been observing your behavior for the past 15 minutes. I watched how you responded to this young woman's polite request. I watched the contempt on your face. I watched the way you spoke to her. And I watched you deliberately destroy her property." Brenda tried to interrupt. "Sir, I was just enforcing company policy." The guitar was too large for carry-on, and she refused to. Maxwell held up a hand, silencing her. Don't insult my intelligence or the intelligence of everyone on this aircraft by pretending this was about policy. I've been in corporate leadership for 40 years. I know discrimination when I see it. And what you just did wasn't enforcing policy. It was an act of cruelty rooted in prejudice." He turned to address the cabin. "I want to apologize to every passenger on this flight, but especially to the young woman whose property was just destroyed. This is not who we are as an airline. This is not what we stand for. And I can promise you, there will be consequences." He looked back at Brenda, and his voice became harder. "Ms. Hutchins, you've just made the biggest mistake of your career. You're done. Not just on this flight. Done with this airline." Brenda's legs gave out. She grabbed the nearest seat back to keep from falling. "Sir, please, I have 2 kids. I need this job. It was just an accident, I swear." Maxwell shook his head. "The time for truth was before you destroyed that guitar. You made your choice. Now you live with it." He knelt down beside Amara, his voice becoming gentle. "Young lady, I am profoundly sorry for what you've experienced today. I promise you, we will make this right." Captain Wallace appeared from the cockpit. He was a black man in his early 50s with gray threading through his close-cropped hair, wearing his uniform with the kind of precision that spoke to 3 decades of military and commercial aviation experience. His face was set in serious lines as he assessed the situation: destroyed guitar, crying passenger on the floor, divided and angry cabin, and a member of his airline's board of directors standing in the aisle. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice carrying the command of someone used to managing crises. "Why haven't we pushed back from the gate?" Maxwell straightened. "Captain Wallace, I'm Maxwell Sterling, board member. We have a serious incident. This flight attendant," he gestured to Brenda, "deliberately destroyed a passenger's valuable property. I witnessed the entire interaction, and it was clearly an act of discrimination and retaliation." Wallace's jaw tightened. He looked at the guitar pieces scattered on the floor, then at Amara's tear-stained face, then at Brenda, who was trembling. "Miss Hutchins, is this true?" Brenda's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Captain, I was simply following our carry-on baggage policy. The guitar was too large for the overhead compartment, and when I tried to take it to check it at the gate, it slipped from my hands. It was an accident." Rosa stepped forward, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness about contradicting a senior colleague. "Captain, that's not what happened. I was standing right here." Brenda grabbed the guitar aggressively, and when the passenger tried to take it back carefully, Brenda pulled it away and then deliberately let it fall. "It wasn't an accident. I saw her face. She meant to do it." Travis moved to stand beside Rosa. "Captain, I need to say something too. This isn't the first time I've witnessed Brenda treat passengers of color differently than white passengers. I've been documenting incidents for months. He pulled out his phone, showing a notes app filled with dated entries. September 14, Brenda refused to help a black family find space for their stroller while she had just assisted a white family with the same request. October 3, she made a Middle Eastern man go through additional ID checks that weren't required. October 29, she gave a Latino passenger wrong information about connecting flights, and I later found out it was deliberately misleading. Wallace's expression grew darker with each example. Why didn't you report this before? Travis looked down. I did, sir. I filed 3 formal complaints with our regional supervisor. Nothing ever happened. I was told Brenda had been with the company for 15 years and had connections in management. I was advised to focus on my own performance. Wallace turned to Maxwell. Mr. Sterling, I'm going to request access to our cabin camera footage. Would you like to review it with me? Maxwell nodded. Absolutely. Wallace pulled out his tablet, navigating to the airline's internal security system. Airlines didn't advertise it widely, but most modern aircraft had discrete cameras throughout the cabin for security purposes. Within 2 minutes, he had pulled up the relevant footage. He and Maxwell watched the screen together, and every passenger nearby could see their faces grow more severe as the video played. The footage showed everything in clear, undeniable detail: Amara asking politely for help, Brenda's hostile response, the escalating confrontation, Geneva's intervention, and then the critical moment. The camera angle was perfect. It showed Brenda grabbing the guitar case, Amara reaching for it gently, and Brenda deliberately pulling it away and releasing her grip. There was no ambiguity. The intentionality was obvious in every frame. Wallace closed the tablet, and when he looked at Brenda, his disappointment was palpable. Ms. Hutchins, I've reviewed the security footage. You clearly had full control of that instrument. You dropped it deliberately. This is not only a violation of company policy regarding passenger treatment, but it's also destruction of property and potentially a criminal matter. Brenda began crying, mascara running down her face. Captain, please. I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me. She was just being so difficult, and everyone was staring, and I felt disrespected. Geneva, who had remained standing near Amara, cut in with a voice full of righteous anger. You felt disrespected? This child asked you politely for help, and you treated her like garbage from the moment you saw her. We all saw it. We all know why. A white passenger spoke up. I hate to say it, but I saw the same thing. That attendant helped me with my bag earlier, no questions asked. But the way she looked at this young woman was completely different. Like she was looking at someone beneath her. Hazel added, she was perfectly friendly to me too. It was night and day when she interacted with passengers of different races. Maxwell pulled out his phone and dialed a number. When someone answered, he spoke with calm authority. Sharon, it's Maxwell. I'm on flight 2847 from Atlanta to Nashville, and we have a code red situation that requires your immediate attention. He was calling Sharon Blackwell, the airline's CEO, directly. The passengers close enough to hear murmured in amazement. This was clearly not a standard response to an incident. Maxwell spent 3 minutes describing what had occurred, occasionally pausing to let Sharon speak. Finally, he said, she's standing right here. Yes, I'll put you on speaker. He tapped his phone screen and held it up. Sharon Blackwell's voice came through, professional but tight with controlled anger. This is CEO Sharon Blackwell. To the flight attendant involved, Ms. Hutchins, you are hereby placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. You are to surrender your wings and identification badge to Captain Wallace. You will not serve on this or any other flight. A member of airport security will meet the aircraft to escort you from the plane. Do you understand? Brenda was crying harder now, her whole body shaking. Please, Ms. Blackwell, I have 2 kids to support. I've been with this company for 15 years. Please don't do this. I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. Sharon's voice didn't soften. You didn't make a mistake, Ms. Hutchins. You made a choice. Multiple choices, in fact, over what appears to be an extended period of discrimination. Your employment with this airline is terminated effective immediately. You will receive formal notification within 24 hours, along with information about final compensation and benefits. The finality in those words silenced the cabin. Brenda sank into a crew seat, her face in her hands. Rosa looked both relieved and sad, the complex emotion of watching a colleague self-destruct. Travis stood straighter, vindication and sorrow mixing on his young face. In the chaos, a passenger in row 7, a woman named Iris with purple-streaked hair and multiple ear piercings, had been staring at Amara with growing recognition. Suddenly, her eyes went wide. "Oh my God," she said loudly enough for people around her to hear. "Oh my God, you're Amara Washington." Amara looked up from the guitar pieces she was still cradling, confusion breaking through her grief. Iris fumbled with her phone, pulling up Spotify. "You sang Midnight Blues. That song has been my anthem for months. I must have played it 1,000 times." She held up her phone screen, showing Amara's artist page with its verified blue checkmark and impressive streaming numbers. Other passengers began pulling out their phones, searching. The recognition spread through the cabin like ripples. Jerome, who had been recording everything, suddenly gasped. "Hold up. Hold up. She's got over 500,000 followers on Instagram. She's not just some random singer, she's legit famous." A middle-aged man named Vernon pulled up a recent entertainment news article. "She just got nominated for Best New Artist at the Grammys. The ceremony is in 3 months." He looked at Amara with new respect and horror. That attendant just destroyed a Grammy nominee's guitar. Hazel was reading aloud from her phone. "It says here that Amara Washington is being called the future of jazz, a once-in-a-generation talent who's bringing the genre to a new audience. She sold out the Blue Note in New York last month." Geneva, who had stayed close to Amara this whole time, spoke with pride in her voice. Her grandmother was Dorothy Mae Washington. "I saw Dorothy perform at the Apollo Theater in 1965. That woman was a legend. She played with all the greats, Coltrane, Monk, Ellington, Gillespie. Dorothy was one of the finest jazz guitarists to ever live." Maxwell, who had been focused on the administrative response, now paid closer attention. "That guitar belonged to Dorothy Mae Washington." Amara nodded, unable to speak. Maxwell's face went even more serious. "Young lady, do you know what you were carrying?" He looked at the destroyed instrument with new understanding. A Gibson L5 from 1963 in playable condition, especially one with that provenance, that's. He trailed off, pulling up information on his own phone. Travis, who had been quietly researching, provided the answer. A 63 L5 in excellent condition is worth at least $35,000. But one that belonged to Dorothy Mae Washington? One that was played in performances with jazz legends? That's not just a guitar, that's a museum piece. That could be worth $100,000 or more to the right collector. The number hung in the air. Passengers gasped. Even those who had been sympathetic before seemed shocked by the magnitude of what had been destroyed. Brenda, still sitting in the crew seat with her face in her hands, let out a sound between a sob and a moan. She had thought she was destroying a cheap guitar belonging to a nobody. The reality of what she had actually done was beginning to sink in. Maxwell knelt beside Amara again. "Ms. Washington, I had no idea. Though it shouldn't matter. Every passenger deserves respect regardless of who they are. But I need to ask, had you had this guitar appraised? Do you have documentation of its value?" Amara's voice was hoarse from crying. "My grandmother left papers. Insurance documents. Photos of her playing it with Ellington at Newport in '65. Letters from other musicians. It's all in a safe deposit box in Nashville. She looked at the pieces in her hands. She played this guitar for President Kennedy at a White House dinner in '63, 2 weeks before he was assassinated. There's a photograph. I have it framed in my apartment. The historical significance was staggering. This wasn't just a valuable instrument. It was a tangible connection to critical moments in American cultural history. Geneva wiped tears from her own eyes. Dorothy told me once that Duke Ellington himself had offered to buy that guitar from her. Offered her $10,000 in 1968, which was real money back then. But she wouldn't sell it. Said it was her voice, and you can't sell your voice. Jerome was already typing furiously on his phone. Y'all, this story is about to explode. Famous jazz singer, Grammy nominee, priceless historic guitar destroyed by racist flight attendant. This is every news outlet's dream story. He wasn't exaggerating. His initial video, posted 7 minutes ago, already had 20,000 views and was climbing exponentially. Comments flooded in, "This is heartbreaking. Fire her immediately. That attendant belongs in jail. This is why we still need to talk about racism." The hashtag justice for Amara was already starting to trend. Iris held up her phone. "Amara, I'm so sorry this happened to you. I've been following your career for a year. Your music got me through my divorce. Thank you for everything you create. And I promise, everyone is going to hear about this. That woman will never work in aviation again." Other passengers echoed the sentiment. A man named Keith said, "I'm an attorney. What that attendant did was more than just discrimination. It's destruction of property, and given the value, it might be felony level. You should absolutely press charges." Hazel added, "I work in PR. When this story hits the major news outlets, and it will within hours, this airline is going to face massive backlash unless they respond perfectly. Mr. Sterling, I hope your company is ready." Maxwell nodded grimly. "We will be. This is exactly the kind of systemic problem we've been trying to address. The fact that this woman was reported multiple times and nothing was done, that's on us as an organization. We failed. We failed Ms. Washington, and we failed every passenger of color who has been mistreated by employees who felt protected." Captain Wallace, who had been listening to all of this, made a decision. "Ms. Washington, I want you to know that I, personally, am horrified by what you've experienced on my aircraft. I've been a pilot for this airline for 18 years, and I've always tried to run a respectful, dignified operation. What happened today is a betrayal of everything I believe in." He looked at the other passengers. "I'm going to make an announcement to everyone on board. This incident doesn't leave this plane as a rumor or a he said, she said situation. Everyone needs to understand exactly what occurred and why it's unacceptable." 2 airport security officers boarded the plane, summoned by Captain Wallace. They approached Brenda, who looked up at them with red, swollen eyes. "Ms. Hutchins, you need to come with us," one officer said, not unkindly but firmly. Brenda stood on shaky legs. She unpinned her wings from her uniform jacket and handed them to Captain Wallace. The small piece of metal seemed to weigh nothing and everything. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though it wasn't clear who she was apologizing to. "I'm so sorry." But sorry didn't unbreak the guitar. Sorry didn't erase the cruelty. Sorry didn't undo years of discriminatory behavior. The officers escorted her down the aisle toward the exit. Passengers watched in silence, and on several faces there was satisfaction, but on others, there was something more complicated, the recognition that they were watching a life implode, even if it was self-inflicted. As Brenda passed Amara, she paused. For a moment, it seemed like she might say something directly, might offer some genuine apology or explanation. But Amara didn't look up. She was still holding pieces of her grandmother's guitar, still lost in grief too deep for words. Brenda continued walking, and the last sight anyone had of her was her slumped shoulders disappearing through the aircraft door. Maxwell's phone rang again. Sharon Blackwell calling back. "Max, I just got off a conference call with our executive team and our head of legal. We're releasing a public statement in 15 minutes. I need to speak with Ms. Washington directly if she's willing." Maxwell looked at Amara. "Ms. Washington, the CEO of our airline would like to speak with you. Are you up for that?" Amara took a shuddering breath and nodded. Maxwell switched to speaker mode. Sharon Blackwell's voice came through, and this time the professional distance had given way to genuine emotion. "Ms. Washington, my name is Sharon Blackwell. I'm the CEO of this airline. I want you to know that I am horrified and ashamed by what happened to you today. There is no excuse, no justification, no explanation that makes what occurred acceptable." She paused, and when she continued, her voice was thick. "I understand the guitar that was destroyed belonged to your grandmother, the legendary Dorothy Mae Washington. I'm a jazz lover myself. I have 3 of her albums in my collection. The idea that an instrument she played, an instrument with such historical and personal significance, was destroyed on one of our aircraft through an act of discrimination and cruelty, it makes me sick." Sharon continued, "Here's what we're going to do. First, that employee has been terminated effective immediately. Not suspended, not under investigation, terminated. What she did was caught on multiple cameras, witnessed by dozens of people, and there is zero ambiguity about her culpability. Second, we are going to compensate you fully for the value of that guitar, both its monetary worth and its historical significance. We've already contacted 3 of the country's foremost experts in vintage instruments and musical history to get proper valuations. Third, I'm personally reaching out to the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture to see if they have resources or expertise in restoration of instruments with this kind of provenance. If the guitar can be restored, we'll make sure the best people in the world handle it. If it can't, then the compensation will reflect not just replacement value but the irreplaceable nature of what was lost." Amara finally spoke, her voice small and broken. "It can't be replaced. My grandmother's hands touched every part of that guitar. She played it for 50 years. The wear on the frets, the way the neck was shaped by her grip, the scratches from her ring, those things can't be duplicated. It was hers, and now it's gone." Sharon's voice was gentle. "You're absolutely right, Ms. Washington. Some things are irreplaceable, and I won't pretend otherwise. But we will do everything in our power to make what amends we can. Additionally, we're donating $1 million to organizations dedicated to fighting racial discrimination and promoting equity in the arts. The NAACP, the National Urban League, and Jazz at Lincoln Center will each receive significant contributions in your grandmother's name." Maxwell added, "Ms. Washington, I'm also personally committing to finding the absolute best restoration expert in the world. I have a contact at the Smithsonian who specializes in historic string instruments. If anyone can repair this guitar, he can. And I'll cover all costs personally, separate from the airline's compensation." By this point, other passengers had spontaneously started contributing. Vernon stood up. "I'd like to contribute to a fund for Ms. Washington. Is there a way to set that up?" Iris immediately pulled out her phone. "I'm creating a GoFundMe right now. Let's show her that good people outnumber the hateful ones." Within minutes, the fundraiser was live, and passengers were adding their information. The initial goal was set at $10,000, but it surpassed that within 5 minutes as word spread beyond just the people on the plane. Social media was exploding. Jerome's video had reached 2 million views. Major news outlets were picking up the story. #Justice for Amara was the #1 trending topic on Twitter. Celebrities were weighing in. Other musicians, particularly jazz artists, were expressing their horror and support. The legendary Wynton Marsalis tweeted, "Dorothy Mae Washington was one of the finest to ever play. What happened to her granddaughter and her instrument is a tragedy. We stand with Amara Washington. Geneva, still standing beside Amara like a protective grandmother herself, spoke with fierce pride. Baby girl, your grandmother is looking down right now, and you know what she's feeling. Pride. Not because of what happened, but because of how you handled yourself. You stayed dignified. You didn't strike back. You just stood in your truth. Dorothy would recognize that strength because it's the same strength she had. Rosa approached hesitantly. Ms. Washington, I need to say something. I'm so sorry. I saw Brenda treating passengers badly before today, and I should have been braver about reporting it. I was afraid for my job, afraid of retaliation. But watching what happened to you, I realize my fear cost people their dignity. I should have spoken up sooner. I'm sorry. Amara looked at Rosa and saw genuine remorse. Thank you for speaking up today. That took courage too. Travis added, Ms. Washington, I hope you'll allow me to share my documentation of Brenda's previous behavior with you and with the proper authorities. What happened today was just the most visible instance of a pattern. She needs to face accountability for all of it, not just this moment. The airline's official statement went live on social media and news outlets simultaneously. It was unusually direct and unequivocal. Today, an incident occurred on our flight 2847 that represents a complete failure of our values. A passenger, Amara Washington, was subjected to discriminatory treatment by a flight attendant that culminated in the deliberate destruction of an irreplaceable musical instrument with significant historical value. The employee responsible has been terminated immediately. We are conducting a comprehensive review of our training, reporting, and accountability systems to ensure this never happens again. We are committing $1 million to organizations fighting racial discrimination. And we are personally compensating Ms. Washington for her losses, though we acknowledge that some losses cannot be truly compensated. We failed today. We will do better. The statement was shared hundreds of thousands of times. Some people praised the airline for taking swift action. Others pointed out that swift action after the fact didn't address the systemic failures that allowed Brenda's behavior to continue for years despite reports. Maxwell made one more call, this time to his executive assistant. Linda, I need you to contact Maestro Instruments in New York. Ask for Joseph Chen, he's the head of their restoration department. Tell him Maxwell Sterling needs his expertise on an emergency restoration of a 1963 Gibson L5 with extraordinary historical provenance. Money is no object. I need him on a flight to Nashville tonight if possible. He looked at Amara. Mr. Chen restored a Stradivarius that had been in a fire. If anyone can save your grandmother's guitar, it's him. Captain Wallace addressed the cabin over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. As you're all aware, we've experienced a serious incident today. I want to commend the passengers who spoke up for what was right. I want to apologize to Ms. Washington on behalf of everyone associated with this airline. And I want to make a commitment, when we do take off, which will be momentarily with a replacement crew member, I'm flying us to Nashville personally, and I'm going to make it the smoothest flight I've ever piloted. It's the least I can do. Passengers applauded. Amara managed a small, sad smile. The pieces of the guitar were carefully collected and placed back in the case. Each fragment felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. 6 months later, the Staples Center in Los Angeles sparkled with the manufactured glamour of the Grammy Awards. Searchlights swept across the night sky. Limousines deposited musicians and industry executives in couture and diamonds. Inside, the air hummed with anticipation and the collective nervousness of everyone who had been nominated. Amara Washington sat in the audience wearing an elegant black gown with subtle silver embroidery that caught the light when she moved. Her natural curls framed her face in a soft halo. She had spent the past 6 months processing trauma, recording her album, and watching her life change in ways she never could have imagined. The incident on the plane had been horrific, but the response from the music community and the public had been overwhelming. Her social media following had exploded to over 3 million. Her debut album, released 2 months ago, had debuted at #1 on the jazz charts and cracked the top 20 on the overall Billboard charts, a rare achievement for a jazz recording. The presenter for Best New Artist took the stage. Amara's heart pounded. She was nominated alongside 4 other incredible artists, each deserving of recognition. The odds were supposed to be against her, but something about this night felt different, felt like destiny. And the Grammy for Best New Artist goes to. The envelope opened with theatrical slowness. Amara Washington. The room erupted. People leapt to their feet. Amara sat frozen for a heartbeat, unable to believe it was real. Then Geneva, who Amara had invited as her personal guest and who was sitting right beside her, took her hand and squeezed. "Go on, baby. Go tell your story." Amara walked to the stage on legs that didn't quite feel like her own. She took the Grammy statuette, its weight solid and surreal in her hands. The applause continued for what felt like forever. When it finally quieted enough for her to speak, she took a breath and began. "6 months ago, I thought my dream was over," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "I was on an airplane, just trying to get home, when a flight attendant looked at me and decided I didn't matter. She decided that my grandmother's guitar, an instrument that had survived 60 years and traveled to more cities than I've been alive, didn't matter. And she destroyed it. She destroyed it because I'm black, and she thought she could. She thought there would be no consequences." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. But she was wrong. Because on that plane were people who refused to be silent. People of all colors, all backgrounds, who said, "This is wrong, and we won't accept it." There was a CEO who cared more about doing right than protecting the company image. There was a pilot who stood for dignity. There were passengers who filmed the truth and shared it with the world. And there was a grandmother named Geneva Patterson, who is here with me tonight, who knelt beside me when I was broken and reminded me that I was strong. Amara looked directly into the camera. "My grandmother, Dorothy Mae Washington, taught me that music is freedom. She taught me that nobody can take your voice unless you let them. And she taught me that sometimes the hardest moments become the most powerful ones if you refuse to let them destroy you." She held up the Grammy. "This award isn't just for me. It's for every person who has been told they don't belong. It's for every artist who has faced discrimination but kept creating anyway. It's for my grandmother, who played through the Jim Crow era when clubs wouldn't let her enter through the front door, but once she started playing, nobody could deny her genius. And it's for everyone who believes that we can build a better world where talent and dignity matter more than prejudice." The camera cut to Maxwell Sterling in the audience, standing and applauding with tears in his eyes. Then to Rosa and Travis, who were crying openly. Then to Jerome, who was recording on his phone like he had that day on the plane, but this time capturing triumph instead of trauma. The next shot showed a montage, Brenda in a small apartment, watching the ceremony alone, her face a mask of regret and defeat. She had been unable to find work in aviation. Her lawsuit against the airline for wrongful termination had been dismissed immediately, the video evidence too damning to overcome. She worked part-time at a grocery store, her life a shadow of what it had been. The story had become a case study in diversity training programs across the airline industry and beyond. Her name had become synonymous with the consequences of discrimination. The broadcast cut to a training session at a major airline. The instructor said, "Now we're going to watch a case study of what not to do," and the video of Brenda dropping the guitar began to play. New employees watched in horror, the lesson clear: hatred has a cost. The scene shifted to a bright community center. Amara stood at a podium announcing the Dorothy Mae Washington Scholarship Fund. Behind her, a display showed the restored guitar, protected in a climate-controlled case. Joseph Chen, the master restorer, had spent 2 months painstakingly piecing it back together. The cracks remained visible, thin silver lines running through the wood where they had been stabilized with specialized adhesives and carbon fiber reinforcement. The neck had been reconstructed with new internal supports. It would never be exactly as it had been, but it was playable again, and the sound, remarkably, was still beautiful. These scars, Amara had said when she first played it after the restoration, remind me that broken things can be made whole. They're different, but they're still valuable. Maybe more valuable, because they survived. 50 students, all young people of color pursuing music education, received scholarships funded by the donations that had poured in. The GoFundMe that Iris had started on the plane had raised over $800,000. Combined with the airline's donation and contributions from the music industry, the fund was endowed with nearly $2 million. It would support aspiring jazz musicians for decades. Amara had also established a sister program that provided instruments to students who couldn't afford them, ensuring that lack of resources would never silence potential talent. The final scene showed a concert hall filled to capacity. Amara walked onto the stage, her grandmother's restored guitar slung across her body. The audience rose for a standing ovation before she played a single note. She sat on a simple stool under a single spotlight and began to play Freedom Blues, the song she had written in the aftermath of the incident. The lyrics wove together personal pain and collective history, her grandmother's story and her own, the brutality of discrimination and the resilience of spirit. They tried to break me down, but I rose from broken strings. This is my grandmother's sound, this is freedom's wings. They thought that hate could silence what my people fought to say. But every scar reminds me we get stronger every day. The camera panned across the audience, showing Geneva with tears streaming down her face, Maxwell Sterling nodding in time with the music, Rosa and Travis holding hands and swaying. In the front row sat young Kennedy, the little girl who had asked for an autograph that day in Atlanta, wearing a junior jazz musician t-shirt and watching Amara with awe. The song built to its climax, Amara's voice soaring over the intricate guitar work, channeling not just her own pain but generations of struggle and triumph. When the final notes faded, the silence held for 3 long seconds before the crowd erupted. Amara stood, held her grandmother's guitar high above her head toward the lights, and the spotlight illuminated every silver scar running through the wood, transforming damage into art, pain into purpose. The screen faded to black with white text appearing, dedicated to Dorothy Mae Washington, 1920 to 2018, and all those who transformed pain into purpose, who refused to be silenced, and who proved that broken things can sing the loudest songs. Now I have a question for all of you watching. What do you think was the most powerful moment in Amara's journey? Was it when Maxwell Sterling stood up and used his power to create change? Was it when the passengers refused to stay silent? Was it when Geneva knelt beside her in grief? Or was it 6 months later when Amara held that Grammy and told the world she couldn't be broken? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you why we have to keep fighting for justice and dignity, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel because we bring you stories that matter, stories about real courage and real change. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters, that their pain matters, and that broken things can become beautiful again. Thank you for watching, and remember, your dignity is not negotiable. Your voice cannot be silenced unless you choose silence. Keep singing, keep fighting, and keep believing that a better world is possible. Until next time, stay strong and stay kind. This story teaches us that discrimination thrives in silence but crumbles when people choose courage over comfort. Amara's experience reveals several critical truths. First, prejudice often hides behind policy and rules, using procedures as weapons rather than guidelines. Second, bystanders hold immense power. Maxwell Sterling, Geneva Patterson, Rosa, Travis, and everyday passengers transformed injustice into accountability by refusing to look away. Their actions remind us that privilege becomes power when used to amplify marginalized voices. Third, systems fail when reports are ignored. Brenda's behavior persisted for years because complaints disappeared into bureaucratic silence, proving that institutions must actively root out discrimination, not passively wait for catastrophic incidents. Fourth, dignity cannot be destroyed, only tested. Amara's grace under cruelty demonstrated strength that no hatred could diminish. Fifth, consequences matter. Swift, transparent accountability sends clear messages about organizational values. Finally, healing isn't about erasing scars but transforming them into purpose. The restored guitar, marked by silver lines, became more meaningful precisely because it survived. Amara's scholarship fund ensures that one act of destruction now creates opportunities for hundreds. We learn that justice requires witnesses willing to speak, leaders willing to act, and survivors willing to transform pain into progress. Every voice matters. Every stand counts. And broken things, when handled with care and commitment, can sing the most powerful songs of all. What moment in this story resonated most deeply with you? Was it when Geneva stood up and called out the injustice? When Maxwell Sterling used his authority to protect rather than defend the institution? Or when Amara held that Grammy and proved that hatred cannot silence purpose? Drop your answer in the comments because your perspective matters. If you believe discrimination has no place in our skies, our workplaces, or our world, show your support by hitting that like button right now. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss stories about courage, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right. And please, share this video with someone who needs to hear that their dignity is not negotiable, that broken things can be restored, and that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they refuse to stay silent. Thank you for watching, for caring, and for being part of a community that believes in justice. May you find the courage to speak when others stay silent, the strength to stand when others sit, and the grace to transform your pain into purpose. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight and remember, your voice is your power. Use it wisely, use it bravely, and never let anyone convince you that you don't matter. Stay blessed and stay bold.